the CORA directors. We've got a number of CORA directors who have been assisting with this, including Eric Ages from Fairway Gorge, Leanne Stanley from Kelowna, and Val Simmons from Haunani in Montreal. And I'm with False Creek in Vancouver. So tonight's session is on OC1 technique. And we've got 4 incredibly talented and experienced coaches from around the Canadian outrigger world here with us tonight, or this afternoon. First of all, before that, you may have just noticed that a recording notice came up on screen. The session is being recorded and we'll be posting it to YouTube. So by remaining on the call, you consent to any contributions that you make being posted on YouTube, and you won't receive any compensation for that. If you speak, the screen might switch to you, and in that respect, both your image and your words would appear on the YouTube video as well. What was I gonna say? Lost my track. Yeah, so it's being recorded and we post it on YouTube. Okay, so we'd like everybody to mute their microphones and post their comments on the chat. And if you've got a detailed question, we'll allow you to unmute yourself, and then we'll have you ask the question verbally. Okay, so tonight, or this afternoon, we have Leanne Stanley from Kelowna. We have Rob Magus from False Creek, James Hill from Latitude 48, and Kamini Jain from Right Angle Performance, who also coaches with False Creek as well. Okay, and all of them are incredibly talented paddlers who have represented Canada, Team Canada at the IVF World Championships, both sprint and distance. All of them are involved with CORA's coaching in some capacity, either currently or in the past. We'll just have each of them give us a short little spiel on their philosophy of OC1 paddling technique. And then we'll move on to a nice long question and answer period where we'll have hopefully some differing views maybe from the various coaches or preferences. So we'll go in order of Leanne, Rob, James, and Kamini. So I'll hand it over to Leanne.
Thanks, Ron. And once again, thanks everybody for joining us on this Saturday afternoon or evening, depending on where in the country or the world you are. I didn't feel right having just Robbie and I talk about this. So I'm super excited to have James and Kamini join us in this call as well. One of the things that I get a lot when I'm coaching is that, well, so-and-so says this, whereas you're saying something different. So we wanted to bring as many voices into the conversation as we could, because I know a lot of folks that are on this call have been coached by one of us over the years, kind of thing. So we just want to talk a little bit about kind of what is our coaching philosophy, why we kind of do what we do, and then we're going to open it up to questions for you folks, to bring your A game with questions, to challenge us, to have us talk about similarities that we may have or differences of why we may say different things. But ultimately, everybody you hear technique from, we're all talking about the same kind of stuff. It's just how we get there that's a little different. So for me, okay, what can you guys see right now? Is it a blue screen?
Leanne, we can see your front slide, so everything's good. It all looks good.
Perfect. Because I've got 2 screens running, and so otherwise you'd be looking at my training program, and that's not quite new. Well, it might be interesting for some people. Anyways, so my coaching philosophy revolves around people finding their passion first. So finding that love of the water, finding that fun. It's been a big piece of my life the last few years, is finding that fun and having everybody smiling on the water. So whether they're new to paddling, whether they're old hats, it doesn't matter. Finding that passion, I always try to go for first. And then we can look at, okay, what is the potential? And then if that's something that they want to pursue, then we can strive for performance. So that's kind of the way that I approach my coaching that I do and the stroke that I coach. So for me, my background is I came from marathon canoe. I got into an outrigger through marathon canoe back with Jan Whitaker, if anyone's familiar with her, out of New York, and the great work that she does in adaptive paddling and has done over the years. And then I got into dragon boats with a bunch of marathoners, and then I got into the national dragon boat team, and then moved out west, got into stand-up, got into surf ski. So a lot of the things that I coach, I talk a lot about efficiency and using the most effective stroke for your body. So everybody's body is built differently. We all have different mobilities that we can do. We all have different strengths. We all have different limb lengths. I talk about coaching people with the T-Rex arms or the super short torsos versus the long arms and the super tall torsos, and talking about how can we generate that leverage and that power based on whatever body you're coming from. And so I like to approach paddlers from a small boat perspective and going, okay, how can we use what you've got and make the most of it to generate that power, and then how we take that into the big boat, which I know some of our other coaches focus a lot more on and have a lot more experience than I do in coaching big boat, so that you can blend in with a crew. And so I'm a Kuakia coach. I worked with Luke Evslin back in the early, maybe 2013-ish. And then from there, I worked with Johnny Puakia, and I really found my foundation for outrigger with those two. And then I coach what I call the lock, load, and launch kind of thing. So lock is like your catch, load is that I call it adding pressure on it, or the press, and then launch is how do we generate the power while that boat's moving after the initial sequence. So if anyone's ever been to any of my clinics, you know that I love drills and drills and drills and go through a lot of these. And I apologize now to James and Kamini, because I got the forewarning because Robbie shared his slides with me about an hour ago and with the rest of the committee, whereas James and Kamini didn't get that. So I pulled some pictures from an old presentation of mine, just to kind of give you a visual of what I talk about when I talk about the lock, load, and launch. So they can all blame me and Robbie for having the slides. So I talk about the stroke coming from the back. Everything starts from the back. Your momentum starts from the back. And then as we come forward, trying to be relaxed as possible, coming forward. And then down when it's always more fun to paddle, but working on coming forward and in at the same time. And that's what I call the lock, is when we're bearing that blade while the body and everything is moving forward. And then going into the lock, going into the lock. This one's kind of fun because we've got the little splash on the front that tells you that I'm actually still moving forward as I go in because I've splashed forward, which is kind of fun. And then that's the fully buried. So that would be the lock just before the pressure's applied through my top hand, which is what I call the load. So load, I talk about being the top hand pressing forward through that angle of the paddle. And then you start your launch, where you start to engage that leg pressing through. And again, I'm not going to get super specifics right now, because we want to hear from everybody of kind of, we're all going to talk about catch, power, and release. And then that's the end of the launch where the stroke's ending. And that must have been off the start because it looks like I'm holding my breath. And Kamini and Ann Mo's in the background in the pretty pink boat. I love your boat, Com. So that's the quick and dirty of me, lock, load, and launch. Yeah, and I'm just out there to have fun and help people make the most of what they got. So next up, we've got Rob Magus, who's working with a lot of the Falls Creek teams around the Falls Creek area right now. And I love chasing you, Robbie, as probably do most of us, but it's a love-hate relationship. You are super speedy, but you also have a way of communicating paddlers new and those of us that have been around a while, in terms of what things we can add to our stroke to help us go faster as we try and, you know, close the gap on you.
Thank you, Leanne. Okay, I guess I'll start with kind of my my paddling philosophy. So right at the time being right now is I usually coach. I kind of have a two-tiered coaching. I do coach some OC1 just for specifically for you to go faster in your OC1, which is a lot like Leanne says, where you have to work on the person's what canoe you're in, what body type you have, what distance you're training for, what kind of race you're going to be doing, all that good stuff to help the paddler along if I'm just doing it in solo. And I'm sure, as Leanne mentioned, there's so many variables in paddling and different things. It's working with the individual to bring their strengths, not just their weaknesses, but focusing on what they do well and actually help them not just work on the things they want to improve on, but actually work on their strengths and get better at what they're actually good at. Having said that, primarily what I coach is I coach OC1 in the way I can put somebody in a team boat. So as you can imagine, if I was coaching a dragon boat for a 200-meter race, the stroke technique and what the actual training is and what I'm coaching is a lot different from 200 meters for a dragon boat race in an OC1 than a 20K iron race in an OC6, on how I go about the drills and what I focus on for the training and what muscle groups and so on and so forth. So right now we're currently in the program I'm training, we're training for a change race in Nepali. So, you know, that's like a 30-minute change with waves and stuff. So a lot of the training revolves around how do we on getting on waves and how we want to do it through a long day and working on endurance. So let's go on then. And that's about it for me. Came from a dragon boat background, I guess, pretty much, and just kind of worked my way up and then really enjoy outrigger canoeing and looking at the finer points of it. So I'm just going to go on some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, or, you know, we're probably all going to talk about. We all say things in a little different way. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about catch. So these are just pictures of me again, catch, of how we can really, as Leanne says, lock or purchase the water or load the CORA, whatever you want to say, but it all comes to the same thing. How do we, I think one of the most important thing is really collecting that water so we can use our levers, use our muscle groups to move the canoe forward. Here's another picture of the catch. Next is next slide, and then we're going to, you know, talk. We're all going to talk about, of course, the pull through. So how do we? If you can see with my hips and stuff, I'm in my mouth. That's where we're actually applying the power. So go to the next slide, and then we talk a little bit about the recovery again. We have slightly different recoveries, I'm sure, between especially the different coaches. So just gonna use a couple of pictures of our recoveries. Next slide. Another recovery of when I was in Pailolo with a bunch of marathon canoe paddlers. Seats 1 and 4 in this picture. That was their second time in an OC6. And this is the first time we've ever paddled together as a crew. So just a little background on that one. And finally, we just talk about, just to talk about how, talk about the exit, and the exits are, what we do style-wise between probably the coaches is probably more different than what we actually, I think, between us as a panel of what we actually talk about in the water, but some of the style stuff is probably different between each of us. That's it. And I should thank Leanne. She's been, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Kamini. She's really, when I got into Dragon Boat, she's my, well, second kind of, or first real kind of Dragon Boat coach. I actually was coached in outrigger by Alan Carlson originally, and I still take a lot of his philosophy and his, I really like his programming. He's done really well, or I used it and it really helps me. And Kamini really came into, when she started with Falls Creek coaching, it was just been very inspirational to me and helped me drive to that next level. And of course, piloting with Leanne was really great, and paddling with James. So I'm really appreciative of being with the rest of these great individuals that helped me be a better paddler and coach.
Next up, I think we're going to James.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I don't have any slides. I had some ready, but I thought we weren't doing the slide thing. So I'm going to go no slides. I don't really have much prepared as far as my background. I've done lots of pretty fun things in both dragon boat and outrigger. You know, I'm coaching now. I've been coaching for about probably 20 years now at this point. So I've had a lot of time to sort of explore my ideas and things like that. I'm going to keep this pretty high level right now. I won't get too far into the actual mechanics of stroke, but as far as my actual just philosophies go, I sort of come from the first point is where you have, if you were to have the perfect paddling machine, and you were to graph what that stroke would look like, that the perfect paddling machine would take, it would be on the y-axis you would have power, and on the x-axis you would have your catch, pull, and exit, right? And that graph would look like a box, right? It would be maximum power for the entire duration of the stroke and then out clean. And so that's kind of what we are striving for. That's where we sort of start. Every one of us has a different graph that goes along that exact sort of graph. None of us can achieve that, you know, or at least we're all going to strive for it, but none of us are really going to get there. And so but that's where we're trying to get to with our paddlers. Everyone's trying to move forward towards that perfect graph. So Robbie and Leanne have both talked a little bit about technique, how we have a lot of commonalities. There's a lot of fundamentals. Leanne, you mentioned Luke Eveslin, he calls them the non-negotiables. So there's a few things that are very fundamental to going fast, whether that's, you know, your catch, your pull, what your paddle looks like, and things like that. And I think we'll get into that later in the discussion. So I won't get into that. And there's a few things that are sort of more negotiable. Those are style points and things like that. And that's where the four of us are likely to differ a little bit more. But I think as far as the actual mechanics of the things that make a boat go fast, whether it's a dragon boat, an OC6, or in this case, an OC1, are going to be very similar as far as how we approach that. So for myself, I'm not necessarily a small guy, but I am a smaller guy, especially when you compare me to somebody like Robbie. So when I come into an OC1 race, I have to compete with the Robbies of the world, because not only is he, you know, he's in my age category. So for me to be able to compete with someone like him, I have to make sure I'm wringing every little piece of efficiency out of my body, right? And that's what I'm trying to get from the athletes that I coach, is trying to wring out every little piece of efficiency out of your body. So going on from that, I think about, you know, we talk about those fundamentals and things like that. We'll talk about different aspects of the stroke, like the catch, pull, exit, recovery, and things like that. All of us talk about those things as individual things, individual aspects of a stroke. I really find it difficult to discuss any one of those pieces of a stroke individually, because they all lead into an efficient sort of movement pattern, right? So your catch is going to lead into your pull, which is going to lead into your exit, which leads into your recovery, and there's this big energy return going on. And so you have to have this sort of symphony of movement to get the most effective stroke that you can possibly get. So that's kind of where I'm looking at. I try to get people to sort of feel what that's like. You know, you want people to be able to not just do what you say necessarily, but to be able to feel what's happening when you get it. It's like, yes, you've got that. You want them to lock that feeling in. You want them to be able to replicate it. I always say consistency is the final frontier, right? So always reaching towards that consistent, being able to replicate that perfect stroke, or as close to perfect as you can get. That's always what we're looking for. So we're looking for kind of a literacy of movement in a way. OC1 is great because that's kind of your paddle lab. That's where you can do whatever you want to do, and you don't have to necessarily be beholden to someone else's stroke rate, to someone else's anything, right? That's where you can learn how to be your most efficient. And yeah, that's pretty much where I'm coming from. I think that's enough of my philosophy right now, and I will leave it there.
Okay, thanks, James. Next up, we've got Kamini.
Well, I'm glad that I'm going last, because I don't have as much to say as the others. I hadn't thought it through in that way. So I guess a little bit to say about my paddling recently is that I think, you know, my favorite thing to paddle is still my K1, but my favorite thing to race and to train for specifically has been V1 the last few years. V1 and Dragon Boat. I love Dragon Boat. But talking about my philosophy of coaching, I would say I've had two major influences in how I coach technique. The first influence is 20 years as a sprint kayaker, which culminated in 2 Olympics. So many of you probably are familiar with this discipline, and you'll know that it's, understand what I'm going to say is that there's lots of technical pressures in this discipline. 2 primary ones are the sensitivity of the boat and the high level of competition. So sprint kayaks are very narrow and they're light and they're short compared to OC1s. So they give strong feedback to ineffective body positions. They rock easily, they bounce easily, they tip easily, or they just go too slow. And since sprint kayak is very competitive, going too slow isn't an option. But thankfully, as sprint kayakers, we also receive a lot of coached hours. So this need to excel beyond others and the assistance to do so creates a very strong technical education. The boat is constantly telling us what to do. The coach is constantly telling us what to do. And our teammates or our training partners are constantly telling us whether we're doing it good enough. So I would say in my case that this whole environment might have set sort of an almost obsessive focus on technique and how to teach it. So I have rather an exacting view of technique and how it translates through different disciplines of paddling. So OC1s are not as responsive to the motions that would disrupt the kayak. So I find there's a natural incentive, there isn't the natural incentive to pay attention. When you get into a sprint kayak, and several of you probably have, and some of you did the similar journey to me of a lifetime of it, is that when you get in it, it sure tells you you have to pay attention because you are swimming. So you are learning how to really pay attention to how your movement is influencing the boat. So OC1s don't give you that same feedback. So I aim for my athletes to develop this attention and to choose motions which only positively affect the run of their canoe. So if we think of James's graph, which is a really great visual, how are we influencing the ability to keep speed through the different parts of the stroke? Where are we losing that speed? What are the body motions we are doing? And is it because we are pushing into the canoe or disrupting the run of the canoe? Or are we just loosening up our power? And how do all those things interplay? So I find that a really interesting journey. And James did say, feeling the boat, really getting athletes to feel the boat and feel their influence. And my second influence is that most of my athletes are training OC1 with a parallel or higher goal of being a crew paddler. So some in OC6, most in Dragon Boat. And Rob was saying he has a lot of OC6 athletes. James also does. So there are elements in OC1 style that can be effective in OC1, but I don't think they fit into my technical objectives in crew boat, especially in Dragon Boat. So I feel like I'm not doing my paddlers a service by allowing them to lose their focus on their goal to be selected to and to maximally contribute to their crews, even during a pandemic when there isn't that crew. Let's keep that lens of how are we going to ultimately be able to perform there? Because I feel that at the same time, there's no disservice to me doing so, having them keep this attention, as I've made sure that these aims go hand in hand with maximizing their OC1 performance. So with all of this OC1 paddling that my crew paddlers are doing, my goal at the end of the pandemic is that my athletes are more effective at OC1, that they have a greater love for it, a greater appreciation for it, and they can train it more effectively and that they can enjoy racing it. But also that their increased understanding of movement patterns leads to more efficient and successful crews. My dream is that we get in the Dragon Boat, we get in, and the philosophies, the language, the awareness just helps those crews blend in a quicker way, and their increased OC1 abilities then allow those crews to be more successful than they've been before, after we get them back, after a building period. So that's it. I hope everybody's going to have lots of questions. We're really looking forward to it. We talked last night and we are really looking forward to getting a variety of questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kamini. So your statements just now just twigs me to something that might be a topic of discussion, is that I hear people, a lot of people say that in an OC1, you can pull further back than in an OC6. And you can almost push off the back. What do you think about a statement like that? Because that doesn't seem to me to be something that would translate to a crew boat, but it's something that could work well in an OC1, but wouldn't necessarily work well.
That's a controversial topic, Ron.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's a good one.
My feeling is
Jumping
that
right in.
Well, there we go.
when you talk about longer, shorter, that already doesn't have an absolute thing to it. So longer for
Right.
me might mean different longer to Rob or different
Right.
longer to Ron. So longer, shorter. I would probably more say that it works fine for, like, I would say my exit point is the same. The pressure might build earlier in a sprint, which means that it feels like your exit is a bit earlier, but it's earlier time-wise as opposed to position-wise, because you've just generated so much more speed through the stroke. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, I agree with Com in terms of it definitely has to do with what type of stroke are you doing? Are you doing, like, I kind of separate distance strokes versus sprint strokes, kind of is like if you're changing gears, then it's going to be a little bit different in terms of how quick do I need to make that recovery? Do I get to relax at the back of my stroke, or is it that trying to press off and generate that momentum back to the front? And again, pressing off the back in length, Liz Comedy said, it means different things to everybody. So that's why it's so important when you do have a coach for a crew boat to figure out what they mean by it and how you achieve it for them.
Yeah,
and for me, sorry, James, for me, at the end of the day, is the most important thing is we're all doing the same thing in the crew boat. Going back to OC1 is, as Leanne was saying earlier, body type, like leverage between me and a person that's 5'5" is going to be a different stroke length just by physics. So working with that person to maximize their boat speed in the solo is different for me than maximizing people for a crew boat where we're trying to achieve the same stroke length and the same style of stroke.
So just to expound on that a little bit, I mean, one of the things that I do pull quite far back, so maybe I'm justifying it there, but I feel as long as you're accelerating the canoe, you can pull far back as you want. The issue comes in is from a technical perspective in OC1 is usually there's sort of two areas where people leak power, right? It's they miss the catch or they lag at the back. So if you're pulling long and you're missing that, you're starting to lag and your power is dying off and your paddle's still in the water, that's when it becomes an issue. If you're still managing to pull back, even if you're coming back past your hip, maybe you're turning your shoulders, if your boat is still accelerating, it's okay, but that's in an OC1. If it comes into a crew boat, you have to adapt to whatever the crew is doing. But I think it's justifiable in OC1 as long as you can still accelerate your canoe.
That makes a lot of sense.
If I can add on to that a little bit, when you're looking at whether or not you're accelerating your canoe, I think so James said there's that lag, but there's also that time where if you decreased your downward pressure through your stroke, as it decreases, you're going to start pushing your weight down into your canoe. So you can have a stern. If this is the stern, you can start to get a stern that bounces. That's not necessarily saying you're pulling back too far. It may be saying you're losing your pressure or your lift too soon and continuing to move back. So we want to make sure we don't just move back and get this motion, move back, but keep this riding high. So if you can be attentive to your stern, it's really going to tell you a lot.
And so with respect to why don't we just take off on James's last comments there and talk about the exit and the recovery and getting that momentum forward. So I think that's something that Rob, we're doing with False Creek, right? Is recovering quickly to the front. I think that adds a bit of momentum to the movement of the boat, right?
Oh, you asking James or me?
Anybody.
For me, what we're working on in particular is paddling in waves. So we're working through different types of recovery based on the condition that we're going to be facing in the water. So one of the things, just besides the recovery, but the stroke in our crew, the thing that I'm trying to coach is actually changing your style of strokes depending on the condition in which you're in. I think somebody put that in the chat window, so I'll just kind of parlay that into what we're talking about. So depending if we're surfing or going into a headwind or going into calm water, or we're trying to start trying to accelerate the canoe, the stroke length, the feel of it, and the recovery time has changed. For an example, during a start piece, if we're trying to get the canoe up to speed, I like to have the recovery quicker in the air than in the water because the canoe is not moving, for example. So your stroke in the water should be slower than your stroke in the air to grab connection until the boat goes up to speed, where the stroke in the water can, or the way the canoe is moving and accelerating forward, where the stroke length and time changes between the air work and the water work. So I think instead of thinking of rate as a constant, like it's always a 1-to-1, always think of difference between the stroke length or the stroke time in the water and the stroke time in the air of two different things, especially like in a headwind. Always think of a headwind of actually going quicker in the air, so you don't lose boat momentum as much as, say, a tailwind or on calm water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the sort of like the analogy is that if you're in a race start, say for an outrigger race, if you're doing a sort of a traditional 6-10-10, if you had a heavy on the 10 on the ups, you wouldn't, if you had a heavy stroke in there, that would totally mess up the planing of the boat, right? So that's a real sort of still an example of the adjustment of the air time and water time type of thing. We've got another question in the chat room. Wait a sec. Okay, what major technical changes or differences would you recommend between OC1 and OC6, in particular because of the different seating positions or leg positioning? Anybody?
I can talk to this.
Okay.
I can start off by talking to this. So, I mean, I typically ask my OC6 paddlers to have both feet forward, but I know that's not universal. So when we go to OC1, I would say the key thing when we're looking at the differences is that now, you're sitting here and your feet are down here in OC6, and now you're sitting here and your feet are up here. So you have more of a need for some lower back flexibility, but when you get to OC1, in order to hold that position, sometimes people aren't, when they start to slouch because the feet aren't as low, and lower feet like we do in our chairs right now help our back be straight. So it's just something to be aware of, keeping the lower back and the hips really flexible. But now we have this ability to get this nice, really linear forward push through our legs, rather than when they're down here. It's a different sort of pressure point. We can tend to do this and make our boat bounce when we're in OC6. So now we have this, which helps us take out our legs contribution to boat bounce. So I'd say the major technical changes, and it depends how you paddle OC6 as well as how you sit in OC6, but would be, you're looking generally, I would say, if I was to take my athletes from the two, I would be looking at more rotation. The stroke is more upright. We're not reaching, the water is closer to us, so we don't have to reach down as far to get it. Paddle is a little bit shorter. A lot, sort of more of a rotational, a little bit down, but more rotation. And of course the water just comes to us, so we don't have to reach down for it so much. So that would be my major sort of differences.
Okay, do you have any comments on blade face? Phil Gorsuch was asking about blade face surface area.
So yeah, his comment says something about kind of in the past few years, a lot of the blade surface areas are getting bigger. And just like a lot of things in paddling, a lot of people are looking at what the Tahitians are doing, because the Tahitians go fast. And so those of us that have had the opportunity to go down there and see their blades, a lot of people brought them back, and we're looking for those larger surface areas. If we think about the Tahitians, and for a while there was the big debate about stroke rate, and that their stroke rate was so high. But when your boat's moving consistently at 15 to 17 kilometers an hour, yeah, the stroke rate is going to be a lot higher than when your boat's moving at 9 to 10 kilometers an hour. So for them to be able to grab water when they're surfing at such high speeds, or when their flat water speed is so high, yeah, they need a little bit more surface area. For those of us normal folk, it's more about using what you got. It's really fun to work with paddlers and play with, say, a marathon blade and then move them to an outrigger blade, because it's really about teaching them how to feel that water, feel that pressure, feel that grab, feel that lock, of gathering that water behind the blade. Doesn't matter how big your blade is. If you're using a massive surface area blade, you better be super strong. Otherwise, you're likely just ripping a hole in the water. And that's my take. I don't know about the rest of you guys on that one.
I guess for me, generally bigger blade surface area for sprint and smaller surface area for distance. Because I use bigger muscles, more of my shoulders and upper body for sprint, compared to a distance where I want a smaller blade face and it's more trying to be more efficient, and I don't want to get as tired, especially through the shoulders myself.
And it's over sooner.
Yeah.
I would say it's more about, you have to be technically pretty close to perfect or whatever before your equipment matters that much. If you have a giant blade face and you're not getting your catch locked in, it doesn't matter. Like you said, you're just pulling in more turbulence. And if you're in a crew boat, that's actually going to affect the people behind you. So I would say, focus on getting your catch locked in regardless of your size of blade. So before you're spending $500 to get a new paddle, just work on your tech first. That would be what I would think about that.
Yeah, I remember being a coach manager in a change race one year up in Vernon, and watching the crew, and I knew that seat 4 had a pure blade with a big ass face, and everybody who sat in seat 4 was dragging that blade. Everybody was out, but seat 4 was always like a split second in a bit longer. So, okay, thanks everybody. So Leanne. Kevin, that has a question about gears. I suppose that's like intensity levels or whatnot.
Yeah, that totally is intensity levels. So Ron, you alluded to earlier about the start sequence of I don't know, your 6, 10, 10 or something like that.
Yeah.
If I go back in my memory of dragon boat or crew boats that use numbers, were those, my crews don't use numbers.
Yeah.
We go by feel. Your 6 is kind of like that, trying to move that boat from nothing to something, right? You're really focused on, gathering that water in gathering that blade, water behind the blade, and then that quick recovery to try and get back in. But when you go into those acceleration strokes, you're not quite coming back as far. You're more up front and you're coming out a little bit sooner. So when I talk about gears, I'm talking about you're trying to either make a move on someone to get on their wash, or get through their wash or get over the wash. You're trying to catch that wave where you're just kind of coming down in here and you're downwinding, and you're coming up here where you just need a stroke or two to get onto that wave. It's going to be different than if you're taking a stroke like you're in a 20K race. So a lot of the folks I work with, we try to not get into the metronome in your head of having the same cadence all the time, because depending on the currents in the water, the waves that are coming at you, the winds, we need to adjust. And ultimately, depending on the length of race, the water conditions, you're going to adjust frequently throughout there. So yeah, gears for me often have to do with changing a little bit about what's happening at the back, and then changing a little bit about what's happening, how far back am I coming at the front, kind of thing in terms of the pressure, where am I coming out sooner? So not a great explanation, but it's all about changing the power and shifting the stroke to accomplish what you need.
Yeah, Leanne, just maybe just to add a bit of vocabulary, because I know different words work for different people. So maybe the gears work for some people. We usually say it like, you're putting tools in your toolbox. So you have to be able to pop it up front. You have to go long. You have to do in the middle. You maybe, like the examples you gave were perfect as far as getting an overlap, breaking an overlap, getting on a wash, breaking the elastic, catching a wave, all that kind of stuff. But you need different tools for different things. And that's just bang, 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 long, long, and everything in between. You have to be sort of adaptable enough to do that. So maybe that's same thing, different vocabulary.
Beautiful.
Okay, and then we've got another question. I guess this one, maybe Kamini can answer this one. How would you recommend training on OC stroke-wise with an ultimate goal of dragon boat paddling?
So, my favorite topic. Again, like I said on the last question, it depends a little bit on what your technical style of your coach is in dragon boat. I am finding that Canadian dragon boating at the higher levels is moving more into a consistent sort of model. We used to have quite a big Western Eastern difference, and now a lot of these really high hands like this have come out and become a little bit more neutral. So some of these positions that are quite non-linear or collapsing of the spine with that lots of showing back to the shore, those are starting to go away, which is good for OC1, because if you paddle OC1 that way, you're really going to notice, partly because of the similar with the last question where your feet are higher relative to your body, is that there's less room for you to do sort of non-linear body positions. So I would think about trying to be nice and open. I think all dragon boat styles for the most part are like looking for an open position through here. There is some OC1 styles where the top arm is down more in here. So that's a little bit, doesn't lend itself as well to dragon boat as if you start with a style that's just a little higher than the head, getting the leverage that comes down past the head, rather than starting sort of at the face and coming down lower. And that just allows us to keep working on that sense of mobility that we use for dragon boat, because our blades are so tiny that we really need to be able to move forward and down on them when we get back into those boats. So I'd sort of make sure neutral shoulder, not like this, neutral shoulder. OC1 is so good for working on that. Just a little higher than this one, lots of rotation, but let the top arm be nice and high and active through here, so that when you get into dragon boat, you got your person in front of you, you can easily get out and around with the position that you've been working on in OC1, other than having it here. And when of course you'll hit the person in front of you continually.
I know that feeling well of punching the person in front of me.
And then you get punched back.
Yep.
Anybody else have any comments on that, or? Okay, next up we've got Martin Franklin, who's asking about dropping or hinging, I guess, on the catch, maintaining the blade at a positive angle. He's struggling with, I suppose, the dropping his torso versus just dropping his arms. Comments from somebody?
I'll start, I guess. I would say to start with, you want to, with your arms and your body, that relationship there, it's a framework that you don't really want that breaking down. So you don't want your arms moving separately like that to drop at the front, because that's a breakdown, and it gets you into smaller muscle groups in your arms instead of your bigger muscle groups in your body. I try to not use the word hinge too much because people get the wrong idea about that. But as far as how I conceptualize it is you're coming forward, you want to make sure you get your shoulders turned. There's a bit of your body between your rib cage and your hip that a lot of people leave stationary. You got to sort of flip that forward too. Get yourself forward, and then you have a little hinge down. You should be recovering low enough that you don't have to drop like so. So you can just kind of come forward and have a little drop in, but it should be your body. You want to make sure that you're not impacting the run of the canoe. So you don't want any bounce if you're dropping like this. So you want to sort of control that descent into the water. Make sure you have some top hand pressure there so you can catch yourself on the blade, get that pressure there so you can lift yourself up as you go. The catches are really, like, that part of is really elusive to explain and for people to get. I would say there's probably 10 to 50% of people who hit their catch consistently really, really well. So it's certainly not anything to impact your esteem. You're in the majority if you're not quite nailing it. So don't let it get you down. It's just something you got to work on.
Yeah. And in terms of how to get your body there, how to get your body down, like James said, you kind of have that little space between your ribs and your hips that, needs to come forward as well. But a lot of people when they come forward, tend to reach up to the sky and then try and drop down. Whereas Martin, we were together last August, weren't we? Yeah. So we talked a lot about aiming that thumb and that elbow down towards the foot pedals as we're going in, just as kind of that visual, and even just doing that thumb tap as we work on dropping that bottom shoulder down into the water. In a 6-man, yes, we need to get even a little bit further down, but we've got the flexibility of having our feet lower, like Kamini talked about, to be able to get there and use the body to come down a little bit more. But ideally in the OC1, we can do that with just dropping that bottom shoulder, leading with that elbow and that hand down towards the water instead of up or even towards the person's arm in front of us if we're in an OC2.
Yeah, thanks. I have your notes. I'll keep looking at them again.
And Leanne, is that sort of also related to sort of maintaining a forward lean in the OC1 throughout, so you're not sitting up?
Yeah,
So
so
it's
a lot of
so
what
it's
I talk about-
minimizes the amount of movement.
Yeah, so I always talk about aiming your shoulders relative to your hips. So one of the things that came up, I think it was Andrea's question earlier, where she talked about feet position in OC1 versus OC6, and Kamini talked about, the lower back flexibility in the OC1. One of the things that benefits people in OC1, if they're training for OC6 or drag boat, is to put a little lift under the back of their OC1 seat to tilt those hips up a little bit. It'll give you a little bit more room, so it feels a little bit more like you're in a bigger boat. But from the shoulders relative to the hip standpoint, I talk about throughout your whole stroke, you want to have your shoulders ahead of your hips. So whether we're going forward to the catch or we're coming through our stroke, at that exit, at no time is our shoulders above our hips or behind our hips, because that's just going to stall that boat back. And then we have to use our abs and do a sit up to come back forward, kind of thing. Whereas we want to use the momentum off the back of the paddle to come forward. And I can't remember what your question was.
I was
No,
talking
that
about
was
the catch. You answered it beautifully, and so did
Yeah.
so did Cam. I really appreciate both of what both of you said.
Thanks,
Okay, so
Martin.
we've got another question about physical movement of the hips rather than, say, rotation between the rib cage and the hip part of your torso. So like, I suppose I guess the comparison is maybe in OC6, where you're actually you might be getting, depending on your tech, depending on the style you have, you actually might be trying to move a hip forward on leg drive in an OC6 versus the different position in an OC1, where your body weight's kind of pressing down and you can't really, it's really hard to move your hips. So comments on that?
Well, maybe I'll start that off, because depending on where for what I've noticed, depending on what style you or different coaches around in the outrigger community have different thoughts on hips, depending on where you're from compared to Hawaii. I kind of, people from like New Zealand, they use a lot of hips as far as I know, and others. I started off with Kamini, and for the people that come from more of a Canadian background, it becomes, for me anyway, it become more from a K1 or even C1 or a marathon canoe background. Hips are a really big part of making power. So for me, thinking about hip rotation and thinking about using the lower body is very important. So that's where I come from. So moving your hips and I just want to, on the point of where your shoulders are, they're kind of in front, but they should be kind of in line with your hips in my way of coaching. So keeping solid as a solid core. So your hips should be leading where your shoulders are going, instead the other way around. Your shoulders should be leading where your hips are going, if that makes sense. So to me, a lot of the rotation should be coming from the hip movement. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Anybody else?
Kamini, I want to bring this one over to you, because having coached down at the Pines and teaming up with the kayak folks down there when I was coaching paracanoe, they always talked about the shoulders and the hips moving kind of as a solid piece. Whereas often, sometimes in outrigger, we talk about, one leading the other kind of thing. As Rob just said, the hip leading the shoulder. What are your thoughts on that, coming from the K1 background
Right.
and into this?
Well, the language of that is, I think what that is a using certain language to get this to happen. So when I was kayaking, I think when I was kayaking, I feel like, and maybe it was just that I was learning it then, but when I was paddling, we switched from the conventional paddle to the wing paddle, which got quite a bit more water, which meant that legs and hips and bodies could now move more because we could weight our blade more and feel more connection with the water that freed us up to move. And the talk was, sequencing is hips, ribs, shoulders coming next. But the idea was, and what happens in kayak is that if you think about your hip moving first, but you've connected through here, then of course everything's going to follow. You're not trying to use this and then break your spine down in little bits and pieces like this. You're trying to move it all together. And in a kayak that happens, because if it doesn't happen, you do some pretty funky things and you get really tippy. You'll see more in high kneel canoes, that sort of a little bit of separation of their hips from their body, but in kayak you don't see it. It just comes right through. But the language was still lead with the hips, lead with the hips, lead with the legs, so that everything could strengthen and come together to break down the tendency that we all paddlers seem to have, which is to lead from the hands where they're connected to the paddle. So that was just the language. And I believe that language holds true for outrigger, is that I am not trying to get my paddlers to segment their motion. I'm trying to get them to have one concise motion. And sometimes the language is to trick them into doing it, to reverse a movement pattern that they currently are holding on too tight to. You're nodding, Leanne. Rob's nodding, good.
I think that type of thinking also helps people think about it as a full body movement rather than, when people start out, they're just arm paddling, right? So I have a lot of novices that they'll sit down in the OC1 and they're just, the lower half of their body is just static, right? So yeah.
In kayak, we used to say, just this might be helpful to some of those people that are new, is don't hold on to your seat. Because when you got tippy, when people get scared, they sort of start to hold on to their seat. And as soon as you said, oh, don't hold on to your seat, then you start being able to, hold on to the water with your blade instead and create your stability out on the blade.
Yeah, that makes sense. We've got another question, comments on shoulder blade retraction or protraction for the top arm throughout the stroke.
Can I talk to that? Do you guys mind?
Sure.
Because I already kind of did, but so it's just a bit of a repeat. I think that what this question is this, when the shoulder blade comes up and moves, I would say you're going for a neutral shoulder blade. So you're going for a feeling where, I like to say to people, you've put your tequila on the top shelf and you're looking and you're reaching for it, but your hand's the wrong way. So you're just reaching for it like this. What can tend to happen is, and I get it, I think it comes from, it can come from this idea that I have to hold my hand up, is that we hold it up. We kind of get the chest, the trapezius, and the neck muscles of the neck forming this trifecta that hold our shoulder up. And then that also makes the shoulder blade sitting outside of where it should. Sometimes we get the head over here. So we want to just keep it neutral, just like, okay, just reaching up. And you might be here. If you were one of my athletes or a dragon boater, you'd be up about here, but you're able to keep that shoulder blade as neutral as possible. And it'll stay in that same neutrality through the push, because the push is just coming from the hips or the rotation of the torso. And then similar through the exit, just lifting up again for where maybe that tequila's over here, or maybe it's up there, depending on what your style is, or maybe it's a bit lower. Anything to add, anyone?
It's just like, if you think about the muscles that are doing that protraction and retraction, like if those are tiny muscles. And so like your shoulder's a lot stronger. It's in a biomechanically, it's in a lot stronger position when it's in that neutral position versus trying to go back and forth. So that's like, unless you love your physio and you want to give them lots of money, otherwise it's really not going to help your paddling, because they're very weak muscles and small muscles. And over time, it can lead to overuse and injury. But with that packed shoulder in that neutral position, you're a lot stronger. You can put a lot more leverage and weight on that blade through that top arm.
Yeah, because that was actually one. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and it influences a lot of the integrity of the other joints, all the way down to the hips. That as soon as you sort of move that shoulder blade out of position, it pulls on all sorts of other muscles and bones.
Yeah, because I was, when I saw the question, I was actually wondering, because I thought it was more of a lower, the shoulder blade retraction would be more of a, involved in the lower arm rather than top arm.
Oh,
So that's why
that might-
I thought it was kind of confusing. So.
Oh, it says top arm. Phew.
It
Thanks.
says top arm, but but yeah, so that's why I was kind of confused by the question. Okay, next up, we got another question from Kevin. In a sprint race, what are your thoughts on using more body momentum into the catch or load, I guess on the recovery, versus performing a smoother stroke?
I think Kevin has been watching the video of Terreur Dubois from 2008, where he porpoises through the water. Rob, you want to run on this one, or James?
Yeah, well, I was there at the beach watching it.
A lot of us were.
Yeah, I don't know. Usually, if you're doing a true, like, it depends on. Obviously, I'm coaching more for distance or endurance style. If you're doing 500 meter, a 200 meter sprint is a lot different than even a 500 meter sprint when you're talking about the way you transfer power, what mechanisms are using, being you're obviously not aerobic, you're anaerobic, right? So it really depends on, for me, style wise, is the distance you want to sprint in or paddle in, and how strong you are in different aspects. Usually, if you're doing, say, if you're practicing OC1 for 200 meter cross training in a dragon boat, you're at the gym a lot, trying to get as strong as you can, and that's when you actually do some things that you really shouldn't be doing, but using all your muscles. And really, a lot of, at least for me, a lot of the 200 meter specialists are pretty big upper body strength kind of people, and they really do leverage down on the paddle and change how they paddle compared to somebody that's saying even doing a 500 meter where you have to go to aerobic, or 1,000 meter where it's a lot more lower body, a lot more using a lot more core, and a lot more efficient style of paddling. So it's hard to be precise depending on the individual. It depends on what you're training for, and I'll leave it at that. Maybe some other people could add.
Totally. And if you look at what he does, it's everything that he lands right on that blade, and then so his weight's not coming down into his feet. He's pressing back with his feet. Like, I swear he had to have something to press on to get that kind of traction on the bottom of that boat. But he's launching his body weight forward on that blade. Everything, even though it's not a positive angle, everything is on that blade, and then he's using everything to push it back and come back forward. If you have nailed every part of your technique, by all means, play with it. But as far as an advantage in terms of going fast like that, you're not going to see many people doing that unless they have the weight and the power on the blade to be able to catch that forward momentum of their body. That's just my take.
I don't know if you've seen, there's a video of Manu Millen, who was also, I think he was a world champion sprinter for a while. He's a much smaller guy. He's really slender. Leanne, I just sent you a video. I don't know if you want to pop that up on the screen. It's him racing in New Zealand, I think. He is pretty smooth, and not to hijack the thing, but he gets it really into you can see his change of gears on his start, and then from his middle into his finish, where he really changes his gears really quickly. He goes from really kind of nice and smooth into chop, 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 chop. But he's a much smaller guy. And I've seen him sprint, and he is really fast. Did you get that link?
Opening it right now. Just give me 1 sec here.
Yeah.
Just gotta make it full screen.
With that focus on the catch and loading, is there any kind of an analogy to C1? I have no clue about C1. I've never been in a C1, but just curious, because whenever I watch, say, the Olympics, like that sort of surge motion is what I tend to think of.
Well, C1 paddlers do spend a lot of time trying to sort of make sure that any movement they get in their canoes is, you kind of get this trade-off, right? Like, you could put in a lot of power and rock your boat like crazy, or you could run a totally smooth boat. And where are you actually moving the fastest along that continuum? So I think that athletes who sprint and athletes who sprint in sprint canoe as well as outrigger will spend a lot of time to decide, well, how much am I faster if I rock my boat more, or will I be faster if I smooth it down? And you just train enough that you know, you choose your point and then you commit to it, but you could still continue to work to get smoother and see if that makes you faster.
Okay, here we go.
So this is, I think this is him in lane 1, isn't it? And then Tipu in lane 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I watched that
But
one.
you can see him. He's still a little bit bouncy there, but he's pretty smooth, nice and long. And then when he comes into his finish, he's gonna do this again.
Yeah, when you yeah.
Yeah, see, he pops up.
Yep.
So I guess the answer is kind of both, but that's also a good example of changing gears too.
Yeah, well, he's going from aerobic to anaerobic at the finish,
Yeah.
obviously, to finish it off. So then you can use those smaller muscle groups because you're going to build lactic, but you know the race is almost over, so you're not going to.
But that's how he surfs too. Like I found using that example, not to hijack the thread, but I always say, like, if you're in a 50-50 on a wave, if you manage to do that little pop, 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 all of a sudden it's 75-25, you're going to get it.
Yeah, and then you flush it out at your, and then when you're surfing and flush it out, right, James?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for those people who are interested in C1, Brendan has put in, it's the difference between Lawrence and Katie, which are Canada's top 2 female canoe paddlers. And it is really interesting to watch them because they're basically like exactly the same speed, but they're both move very, very, very differently. So if you're watching anything with them, and hopefully it'll be an Olympic final with both of them in it, then it'll be interesting to watch.
Cool.
Yay, Canadian canoeing for women finally. How long has it been? Forever.
Okay, there was a question I missed earlier. Double bend versus single bend paddles. Comments? Other than
another
crew boats, they
controversial
all
one.
need to be the same. What's that? It's another controversial one. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think you try what you try them, and you pick a paddle that you really like, would be what I would say. But I would also say that a crew should all be the same. If you're an iron crew, if you're a change crew, for sure, because like Ron said earlier, you don't want to get into 4-seat and have a paddle is totally different. But an iron crew, the way the pressure is loaded onto them is enough difference that if you are sort of a performance OC6 crew, you would want them all to be the same. If you're a rec crew, just grab what you have and go out and paddle. But I would say on your own in OC1, for V1, I love my double bend. And for OC6, I use a straight just because single bend, just because that's what we've always used. You guys, what do you think?
So much is personal preference, I think, and what you get used to. Like sitting in boats, different things feel comfortable for different people. Like even if you compare the Puakia boats to the Kaiva'a boats, just the angle of the foot pedals and the cockpit for the feet is different. So a lot just comes down to personal comfort of what you feel like. But for you folks that are training folks from OC1 and into Dragon Boat, do you have a preference for your paddlers using straight shaft since Dragon Boat's a straight shaft? Or do you feel it matters?
Anyone?
Can you say that again, Leanne? Sorry.
So like for me, if you're a straight up outrigger paddler, then personal preference. But for me, just thinking about, okay, all Dragon Boat paddles are straight shaft. So if you're training someone to ultimately make a Dragon Boat crew, would it be better for them to paddle with the straight shaft, even though it's still a bent blade, versus the Dragon Boat straight shaft, straight blade?
I'd say whatever makes them faster in a time trial.
I asked my Dragon Boaters to get single bend paddles because of the fundamental difference in your wrist position with both of them. So a double bend will be more like this, and a single bend will be more like that with the bottom wrist. So I would like them to be able to carry over the intricacies of that, which actually I don't think are into whatever I just said. I think they're quite foundational as hand positions. So unless they have huge OC1 goals or OC1 racing goals where they will pick their preference. If they're just out to train for dragon boat, I would have them with a single bend paddle.
And we've got a great comment here from Katie Peck, who is a paddler out of New York. She comes from a marathon background. She's been doing the U24 dragon boat stuff for a while. I don't think she's young enough to do that anymore. But she was just talking about how she feels that there's more transfer between her single marathon blade to the dragon boat blade, whereas the double bend feels like a different monster. And I think it comes back to what you were saying, is just that little bit of a slight wrist angle. Because I know I was quite comfortable with the straight shaft when I came out of marathon and dragon boat into outrigger as well. Whereas now that I've spent time with the double bend, it's definitely my go-to.
So what do you mean by wrist angle?
So I don't have a double bend
No
paddle.
blade.
Oh, I do. Hang on.
So it has to do with the bottom hand wrist angle. So she just kind of showed us just
Yeah.
here to here.
Right.
But she's going to actually show us on a blade
Okay.
kind of thing of what that means.
Because
switched to a double bend once I had a couple shoulder injuries. I found it was just a little bit easier on my shoulder, if that matters. Because I dislocated one and tore the labrum in the other, so I switched just to give myself a little bit more of a break in that area. So.
And when I was training for cross training in OC for dragon boat, I actually used a short C1 blade a little bit too, just to kind of, it has obviously a larger surface area than a dragon boat blade, but it's very similar in how it feels to a dragon boat blade for me. So I felt that could be useful as well.
I thought I had a double bend blade handy too, but I don't. But when
Okay.
you look at the double bend, when it comes through, it kind of straightens here.
Yeah.
So, and then the blade comes out like that, so that your wrist is just straighter. And then it means at the end of your stroke, you know, with a normal sort of single bend, you're like this, and a double bend, you can be a little bit like this. So you go from this angle in double bend to that, and in a single bend, you'd go from like that to neutral. So you sort of go like that to neutral. So just a little bit different. And
Okay.
of course, anything, well, maybe not of course, but I find that a lot of what happens here does influence what happens here and then here, as far as how this sort of thing influences everything up the arm and how it loosens and contracts.
Okay. That also ties into gripping the paddle with your lower hand, because I'm short. I find that sort of almost a thumbless grip gives me a little bit more reach on the catch. Sort of like, you know how if you're doing a lat pull down at the gym, you can do a thumbless grip on a lat pull down. So this is me doing sort of the pull without actually gripping in my palm, but more the shaft is in my fingers. Now, is that anything that anybody wants to comment on, or is that just weird?
Anyone else want to talk before I go?
You can go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so what
Hold it
part
as
of the
tight as
stroke are you,
possible.
what part of the stroke are you talking about, Ron? Because like
Just on the pull.
on the pull. So you're already locked in, you've already spent your top arm, you're into the bottom.
Yeah.
Pull. I don't, my thumbs don't go around a paddle
Yeah, okay.
compared to everybody else.
Yeah.
So like at the start of the stroke, I've got the pressure in through here. So it's coming down through that Finar web as I press down through that shaft. But at no point can my thumb actually fit around a paddle.
Okay, that's what, okay.
And ultimately, if you're gripping with that thumb, if you just pull on your thumb here and you feel what it does in your forearm, I'm guessing that off starts, and sometimes, or in dragon boat races, you tend to get like the what do we call it? The rock arms?
Popeye arm.
Yeah, Popeye arm. So it's, because if you're gripping around it just by squeezing in on that paddle, the forearm muscles that are responsible for that action versus keeping it relaxed,
So
but
the
it's not
difference is,
actually giving you anything.
right, so the difference is this versus that, right?
Well, it can sit there, just don't wrap it around and pull on it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking, yeah, okay.
Ron, I'd be curious what happens on your exit, because if your thumb's not there to
on the inside.
support the
Well,
exit. Like I would just
well,
be pushing against
yeah.
and getting nice thumbs.
Well, the thing is that the style that we have is a low recovery.
Oh,
So
you're out
for me-
here.
Yeah, so on the recovery, it's like that. And I can actually like wiggle and stretch my fingers because it's resting on my thumb, and then on the
Oh, so
catch,
your
it
thumb's under now.
switches to that, yeah. Which is kind of weird, but yeah. Okay.
I wouldn't recommend taking your thumb off that inside just because different waves can catch things and it can
Yeah.
pull it out of that hook, but
Yeah.
just don't add power.
Yeah.
Don't try to pull with the thumb. Think about pulling with bottom fingers.
Yeah, because I tend to see particularly beginner paddlers who have sort of a death grip on their lower arm or lower hand because they're afraid of like, I don't know, dropping the paddle or something like that, right? So yeah. Okay, so
It's
one
great to
other
see Scott in the chat now.
what? One
So
other
Scott Murray
anecdote.
is a coach from Ontario who's one of the program directors for Dragon Boat Canada, I believe.
Okay, any tips on dragon boat paddlers training in OC1, feeling confident on both sides, not just their dragon boat side?
Learn to fly your AMA.
Now that the water's warmer.
That sounds like a smart ass comment, but I'm serious. Like you just have to develop your comfort level. And if you know your brace is there, you will feel 10 times more confident. Like now when I'm in, the bigger the water is, the more time I spend on my right because I know that I have an option if I'm on my right. If I'm on my left, I'm hooped if something goes
How
wrong.
about the other way, James? Can you fly your AMA if you rigged it on the right side?
Kamini can tell you that no, I can't. 'Cause I came over for one time trial and I flipped immediately
I
when
forgot.
it was rigged backwards.
I think that they just have to go for it. Like whether you're trying to fly your AMA or not, you just have to. Often people don't notice. Like say your AMA's on your left. If your left dragon boat are off, hopefully maybe Scott has. I'm assuming from what his comment is that he has boats that can rig right. So people will sit like this, and whether they're outrigger paddlers or dragon boat paddlers, they'll stay like this, and they won't really realize that their body is like this because you just sort of unlearn what neutral is. So somebody from the outside saying like, get over there. One thing that I've done, Scott, which was kind of fun, is that wading into the water and so this boat is left rigged. I grab the AMA and I just hold it up and they paddle on the right and I hold it up a little bit. They won't fall in. It's just about this much off the water. And it helps them break down because now they feel like they can get out. I don't let it lift up or go down, and they feel like they can get out sort of to reset that. And sorry, I'm going like this, and because the boat is tilted, not because I think we should paddle outrigger this way. So it gets them out of leaning away from that right side.
Tommy, one thing when you just did that there, when you had that big lean over, right? There's a little bit of butt drift that happens too. So you're getting your top of your body is in a safe spot, but then your butt lifts up, and pretty soon your butt is actually over the gunnel on the wrong side of the boat. And then if you come over, you're unbalanced.
Right.
So you have to be careful in keeping yourself
exactly.
neutral with your butt on the seat there.
I found for me personally that actually really helped me with my balance when I was learning is actually getting on the C1 and trying to paddle that. If you can paddle sprint canoe a little bit, I think that really goes a long way. And I've tried a little K1, obviously that's awesome too, but from my perspective, I found the C1 really helped me get my comfort level more in the OC1 because you learn how to brace, you learn all these great things, you know how to, you know how the boat runs, and you're more, you go from a C1 and an OC1, it seems like a piece of cake really, balance wise.
I forced my girls into the surf skis with an outrigger paddle to get them out of the left leaning.
Yeah, marathon canoes are good for that too, because your partner nags at you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I probably shouldn't have shown my recovery because we've got a question here that says, can you get back to the exit with the thumb holding the paddle on the recovery?
So this question's from Derek Schroeder, who again is a former national.
Dylan Schroeder.
Dylan.
No, it's not Dylan. It's Derek. Dylan's his son.
Oh.
Derek is a former national team sprint canoeer. So he's done a lot of coaching in dragon boat, in sprint canoe, and he is a big player in the SUP community in Ontario. So a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here about outrigger technique translates a lot really well over to SUP as well. So his question here is about talk about that recovery motion, because we all kind of have a different feeling of recovery, and Ron just kind of shared kind of the relaxed recovery piece. But
Yeah.
what do you guys feel about that recovery? What motions or what analogies do you like to use on that recovery?
We talk about, this one comes from CORA actually, it's the tossing the keys, right? Tossing the keys, but you have that little bend there, I think, because you have to make space, right? So when you're at the back and you're trying to get that blade out on your exit, how do you make space? A lot of people do this, which is not desirable necessarily. You want to keep that down. So in order to make the space, you got to either pull up and across or flex that wrist out to the side, and then it's up and then it's tossing the keys. That's kind of how we look at it.
So Derek's saying cradle the baby bird. I talk about the frisbee, toss the frisbee, feed the chickens, roll the dice kind of thing.
Feed the chickens. Feed the chickens is the one I like, yeah.
But yeah, it's that relaxed bottom arm and wrist, because like exactly what James said, if you're choo-choo training it, if your elbow is following your wrist and following your knuckles, you're pulling up from the shoulder, you're getting that excessive motion, and your traps are they're going to die on you. We want to relax when we can relax, and that's one of the places we can keep those shoulders nice, calm, and quiet.
Okay, we got a comment from Jenna. Left glute pain. That's exactly what I have, and it's because I lean left too much. I can only spend about an hour before I start feeling pain in my left butt cheek, or even just the joint actually, and then it's like even nerve pain. It's
Ron, have you ever taken a level out in your OC1 to see what it is with your rigging when you are sitting in your OC1?
I should do that. I have not done that, to be honest. And the other thing too is that because I've been doing, it's an old boat, is that the foam seat is probably compressed on the left-hand side. So, I need to build that up or whatever. And I have put a piece of foam under the back of it to tilt it up like you were mentioning. But I should probably do that on the left as well. So yeah.
You can always order a new seat too.
That's true.
Or a new canoe. I know some people that sell them.
You'll get it before next year.
There's some available coming in the summertime.
After 7 years, I just figuring out my canoe now.
So yes, it's symptomatic. It can be likely symptomatic of a left lean. So as Leanne said, if you take out a level, and I've had my athletes in our club boats take out levels, and it's shocking how much they have to move up their rigging to make it straight. We have hookies at our club, and most of the women have to put it on the top notch to make the boat straight. They can also, once you have it, make sure that you go get some. I think the best thing for it personally is IMS needles at the physio. That tends to help loosen up that, but do lots of stretching, lower back, piriformes like hips, hamstrings, and then just really work and get somebody else to watch you to help you know if you're straight, but really work on getting that straight. What commonly happens is that when we're paddling on the left, we load our left hip. And when we're paddling on our right, we load our left hip and sort of jimmy the right hip back and forth, but we're still on the left one. So make sure that you're centered, try to feel the weight sitting sort of consistently on your hips when you're just static. One exercise I have paddlers do sometimes is if you're not paddling, if you're just listening to me or you're on a rest, is sit with your blade on the right side. Tend to go like this. So just sit with your blade on the right side, start to feel it moving through, that side of your body, so that when you go off, you have it sort of just already defaulted. But look at your equipment. And as we were saying with Ron, the seats do wear out, especially club boats, right? They wear out and you see the little divot. Common problem. Worst thing about OC1.
One thing that's a little less well-spoken is that I tell people to do the crotch check. When you're sitting in your boat, look down your crotch. Is the line of your leg between your legs and your crotch, is it down the center of your boat? Are your legs tilting to one side, or has your ass shifted? Is there that butt drift that James talked about? And so you do the crotch check.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, we've got a question from Seamus asking about pace changes through the body of a race. I.e., like on the video we just saw, pushes for the finish, or basically, I guess, race strategies.
Yeah, he's talking about on a flat water sprint. He's talking up there.
Oh, yeah.
Like my take is it's a race plan. So knowing if you're in a team boat, obviously your coach is going to work with the team to have that. But from an individual standpoint, it's knowing what you're capable of. Are you a second halfer? Are you that person that can take the most pain? A lot of it is playing with the race plan and working through, starting at max, coming down, going back up, and playing in all kinds of different combinations to figure out what your body likes best, to give it chances to push and then recover, push, recover, and how often you can do that or how long you can do that. For me, there's no set thing, and it changes year to year of my race plan based on what my body's responding to those years. Those of you with more team oriented stuff in terms of race plans, like I know Palm, when I was racing Dragon Boat for you, like it was set, like there was a solid race plan. Everybody knew it. Everybody trained to it.
Yeah, I am not a proponent of pace changes in a sprint, like a 500 meter or shorter sprint. Of 1500 or something with turns is a different thing. But the reason being, we never did it in kayak. We never did it in K4. We came up, we found our pace. And if I'm a good finisher, well, if I'm good at handling pain, I'm just going to handle pain for longer. And trying to find the most economical, consistent pace. You get into crew boats, you try to switch paces. I mean, the Dragon Boaters come back after watching China and they say, we want to do those pace changes. I'm saying, you join the military and paddle twice or 3 times a day for many, many years and get picked out of 800 member people, strong. So in our limitations, I would say that learning pace changes takes a lot of time. Following, if you're stroking, that's one thing, but if you're following somebody else's key thing, then every time you do a pace change, it lags behind. The energy is spent, energy is dissipated. In an individual in kayak, we got our boats up and then we kept them up. If you went down, then you'd have to build it up. And if you went down, you'd have to build it up. If you're a slower OC1 paddler, or you have a heavy OC1 where you never get it up because it just doesn't lift because of whatever, then you don't have that problem of up and down. But hopefully, if we're really looking at nailing down a sprint program, and I know Seamus is strong enough to do this, I would say find your pace. And if you finish that, like train your race pace. And if you finish a training piece and it wasn't hard enough, go harder the next one, go harder, work shorter ones, work economy, work pacing at all different lengths of race pace and race piece and shorter. That's my take on it. Others?
I could add, I'm going to go from the aspect of if I was going to go, there's 2 sides of it. There's the actual, if I was GPSing an actual sprint race compared to what mentally I go through in a sprint race. Generally, if I'm doing a graph, your fastest speed is right at the start or right after the start, and you slowly decrease speed. When you perceive doing a pace change, when in actuality, you may actually just flatten the line, but you actually, and I really haven't seen it, maybe in some boats, but I really haven't seen it, is you actually never increase speed through the race. So the whole, to me, after your start, the rest of the race is minimizing your decrease of speed into the finish. So it can mean, like Leanne says, a few different things for you mentally, where I'm going to try harder or whatever you want to say, or I'm going to change my style a wee bit or go a bit more in the finish, but it's not really, to me, really bringing the boat down and bringing it back up. It's just limiting the amount the boat is slowing down and what you can do mentally to help you go through that process. Because when you're really, really tired and it's really, really sore, and you're really, really sore, it's pushing through that mental wall that you have to do, and whatever mentally you can do to get around that. And of course, that comes with a lot of training. But my thought process is not going into it thinking I'm going to change the boat speed, going faster through a race, if that was what you mean by pace change.
I think yeah, a lot of it is mental. It's like, okay, I'm going to go into relaxed power now. And it's like, okay, in my head, it's 80%, but it's not really 80%.
And a lot of people have like GPS display monitors, like there's a big orange one I've seen people have.
Yeah, the NK Speed Coach.
Yeah, so those are those like do you recommend those for people monitoring their pace or whatnot during races and or workouts? And
At in the off season and beginning of the year, I don't like the idea of electronics unless it's heart rate. But once we start getting into things like prepping for sprint trials, which we'll be talking about in 4 weeks, then that's one thing that it does come in handy. But again, current can play a big difference, water conditions. So a pace I can get on one day in one direction is different than a pace another day in another direction. So you kind of have your ballpark.
Yeah, okay. So one last question that we missed earlier is because of the foam seats in the OC1, they limit the amount of hip rotation that you get. What comments have you got about that? Is there any way to sort of overcome that? Or is that just sort of rotating from the, the difference between hip rotation and the torso rotation?
I know Com's got an answer to this one.
Oh,
Don't be short.
I feel like I've been doing too much answering, but I do have an answer to this one. And Cat Town said a seat pad can work. So looking at what shorts you're wearing, I like to wear like a nylon, a neoprene, like a lycra under a nylon, so I can move between the layers of shorts instead. But the other thing is, the better you get at putting your weight on the blade, the more you release your butt from the seat. And then it allows, it's almost like, if you're doing a really good sprint, you may feel like you got a little film of air or water under your seat when it feels that good. So that can help. If you're in really rough water, you might be appreciative of that stick. So you might not want to take any sort of slippery kind of surface that you're wearing. But it is a little bit of a limiting thing. I find I don't love those seats, but because I really love using hips. But I can see the reason for their being.
Okay. And then Brendan has another comment. Does anyone know of OC1s with, I guess, a more slippery kind of a seat? Like he mentioned composite seats, but I would think that you'd fall off the boat with composite seats if if you get a big wave from the side or something.
Well, Surskis have buckets, right? Surskis just have buckets. So I guess it could be done. I don't know of any OC1s that do that, but
V1s do. Your V1.
That's true.
Yeah, V1, you're in a cockpit.
Oh, okay.
So I hate to do this, gang, but it is 5:29.
It is time.
It is time. And before you go, oh my gosh, I have so many more questions. A bunch of us are going to be back here in 2 weeks' time. Our next town hall session is anything and all thing OC1, small boat, whatever. Bring your questions. Am I right there, Ron? Eric?
Yep. So that includes like, hey, how do I tie my boat onto my roof rack? Or just
downwinding, anything.
We'll have plenty of questions and another hour and a half to discuss everything OC1. And also this session, as I indicated in the notes a few moments ago, is being recorded, and it'll be posted on the CORA website tomorrow or this evening if we can get it done. So you can rewind and replay and develop questions for the meeting 2 weeks from now. And Ron, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Like Leanne mentioned, we'll have another session in 2 weeks. That'll be the last town hall. And then 2 weeks after that, in July, is going to be an IVF information session, and that'll be the last coaches panel before we take a hiatus for the summer. Okay, in terms of racing, we've got small boats virtual race number 3, hosted by Kelowna Paddle Center and Vernon Paddling Center, starting up tomorrow. And you can register and log your race times for the next 2 weeks. That'll end at the end of June. And for July in British Columbia, for those of you in BC, because we're expecting our transition to a restart step 2, which will open up competition. So subject to moving to step 2, Lotus Sports Club is planning on having the Lotus Iron Small Boats race the first weekend of July. And Falls Creek is planning on having an Around Bowen small boats race, I think sometime around the third weekend of July as well. Note that the Bowen one is long. It's 32K if you're doing it nonstop, or if it's a relay, it's 18 or 15K for each of the legs. So watch out for all that coming from CORA. And thanks everybody for joining us today.